Hi guys, welcome to International Relations and the Cold War, 1941 to 1991. Now that is a ridiculously long title, so I'm never going to use that again. Whenever I talk about this course, I'm just going to be talking about the Cold War. So this lesson, you're going to find out what a Cold War is, why America and the Soviet Union were the two superpowers after World War II, and why it was that these two superpowers had a Cold War, or at least the starting points with their foundational ideologies. Now, I've just used a load of complicated terms there. Once you've watched this video, I'd recommend watching this first minute back and just thinking, do I understand every single term which was just used there? Now, to give you a really quick summary, the 50 years of this course is going to be looking at the final years of World War II up until just before my lifetime, 1991. You've got America and the Soviet Union and many other countries who are almost but not really fighting each other. The dark blue countries were ones which strongly sided with America. The dark red ones were the ones which strongly sided with Russia or the Soviet Union. And any shade of blue or pink or light red are countries which are either sometimes allied with them or not really allied with them, and the grey ones were ones which never had any clear allegiance. And you can see just how far this spread is. It isn't just America versus the Soviet Union. But our course is going to focus very, very, very much on Europe and the Cold War, with a few other exceptions. On the screen, we've got 5 different individuals. These are 5 key leaders that you need to know for topic 1, which runs from 1941 up to 1958. So on the left, you've got 2 presidents, Truman and Eisenhower. You've got the only British Prime Minister you need to know for our entire course, Winston Churchill. And then on the right, you've got the first 2 communist leaders for our course. You've got Joseph Stalin from 1924 to 1953, and then after him, Nikita Khrushchev or Khrushchev from 1953 up to 1964. So, in each of these lessons, they're going to be around 20 to 30 minutes long. We'll always have these success criteria, so make sure you can do these as we go through the video. We'll have a lot of times throughout these videos where I'll tell you to pause it and recommend that you do an activity. So please make sure you do as many of these as much as possible. I'll let you know when you absolutely need something to be written down, but throughout the entire video, if you think it would be good for you to write down, and I haven't already said so, make sure you're writing it down as well. Obviously, you can pause it and come back to it as many times as you like. So this is something that you should definitely write down. We need to figure out what on earth a Cold War is. Now, you never really hear the term hot war unless you're comparing it to a Cold War. But a hot war is any war which you've ever heard about before. So World War II, World War I, the Battle of Hastings, the Spanish Armada and the Anglo-Spanish War. These involve actual fighting between either 2 countries or 2 powers. So a civil war would still be a form of a hot war. A Cold War is a time in which there's no direct fighting between those 2 powers or countries, but things are incredibly tense and it could heat up into a hot war. Instead, these 2 sides will compete in other ways. For example, the Olympics, obviously the biggest and most important athletics and sports event in world history. So it's a very good opportunity to show off how amazingly fit and healthy your country is. The space race, where the Soviet Union beat America in every single achievement other than putting a man on the moon first. In terms of the economy, showing that your country is incredibly rich and powerful and your civilians live a really, really rich and fabulous life. And then there are also proxy wars, where rather than a Russian soldier shooting an American soldier, the Soviet Union might pay or supply another country to shoot an American soldier. So that happens in Vietnam, and in the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan in the 1970s and 80s, the reverse happens, where America will fund Afghan rebels to kill Soviet soldiers. So now would be a good time for you guys to pause the video and have a think about what on earth we might mean by superpowers, because by 1945 there really only were 2 superpowers to speak of, America and the Soviet Union. So what might make these 2 countries incredibly powerful? Pause the video and have a think. So before we look at superpowers, we need to have a look at great powers before or during World War II. Now, this map isn't supposed to be a geographical map. Each size is supposed to give you a rough idea of how powerful each of these countries are. And you can see the USA, Britain, Germany, France, the USSR, they're all very roughly the same amount of power. Now you notice you've got them split up into the countries who fought on each side in World War II. So you've got the Axis powers of Germany, Italy and Japan versus Britain, France, America and the Soviet Union. Now given that the war will end with a Cold War between America and the Soviet Union, you might wonder why on earth they were fighting on the same side. There's a phrase you might have heard at the bottom saying the enemy of my enemy is my friend. This can even be better explained with a quote from Winston Churchill, the British Prime Minister. When he heard that Nazi Germany had invaded communist Russia, he's supposed to have said, "If Hitler invaded hell, I'd give a favourable reference to the devil." In other words, he was saying that Hitler is literally the worst possible thing imaginable, so I'd rather back the devil, or I'd rather back Stalin and communist Russia than let Hitler win. But obviously, once Hitler has been defeated, once World War II has ended, all of those rivalries bubbling under the surface can come back. So looking at what the world was like after World War II, you can see from this beautifully descriptive map, Britain and France have lost some power. Germany, Italy and Japan have lost so much power. But America and the Soviet Union, or the USSR, or Russia, they all basically mean the same thing. These two superpowers have emerged for two very different reasons. So America, weirdly, is kind of untouched by the war. I know that sounds weird because right after that it says 420,000 soldiers are killed or wounded. Very few civilians are killed or wounded, less than 1,000 easily. America's land is pretty much undamaged compared to other countries, and its economy is fantastic. It spent 4 years in the war. It spent 6 years across the war funding its allies, creating loans, creating jobs within America which can be built on after the war. It's also the only country with nuclear weapons in 1945. Harry Truman, the president at the time, has used 2 of them on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. They're the things which end World War II in Japan. If you look at the other superpower, the Soviet Union, they've had a very different experience during the war. They've had mass casualties, far more than any other Western power. 8 million soldiers are killed or seriously wounded, and over twice as many civilians. All of the Eastern Europe and West Soviet Union, so places like Moscow or Stalingrad, have been pretty much completely destroyed and have to be built from the ground upwards. But in the Soviet Union's favour, they've got the largest army in the world, easily larger than America's army, and their Red Army is occupying Eastern Europe. They're called the Red Army because red is traditionally the colour of communism. So the Red Army had freed Eastern Europe, places like Poland or Czechoslovakia, from the Nazis at the end of World War II, but they'd never left. So one of the first agreements is going to be what actually happens to those soldiers. Do they just leave? Do the Soviet Union retain some sort of control about that? But we'll cover that in the next 2 lessons. Now, in terms of what makes these 2 countries superpowers, you've got a very rough idea of how big each of the specific countries are here. So obviously you can see America there with its 50 states. The Soviet Union, though, is not actually Russia. I might sometimes call it Russia, and you might sometimes call it Russia, but it's incredibly lazy to do so and a little bit offensive, because the Soviet Union, or the USSR, is actually made up of 14 countries, most of whom did not want to be a part of it. So Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, these sorts of countries were taken over in the 1920s by Russia and formed into the Soviet Union. So both of them are superpowers for their geographical size. Both of them are superpowers for their huge populations. America at this time has a population of around 150 million. The Soviet Union has around 180 million. They're both incredibly strong militarily. Again, that's largely for the Soviet Union in terms of conventional forces. So things like soldiers, planes and tanks. For America, they've still got all of that, but their main military strength lies in the use of nuclear weapons. And both of them have massive amounts of natural resources. That could be lumber, could be precious metals, iron, coal, oil. All of these things make their economy fantastic, but it also means that they would be able to stay in a war if it would happen for many, many years. So, before we start to delve into detail about what each of them believe, I think it's worth having a look at their national anthems. Britain's national anthem is fine. God save the Queen, God save the Queen, God save the Queen. You get the idea. But America and the Soviet Union both have fantastic national anthems. I've left links to the national anthems in the description underneath the video. So pause this video and go listen to the first minute or so of each of their videos. Obviously, the Soviet one is in Russian, but it should have English translations for you. So bullet point 2 or 3 things for each country. Think about the tone or the mood. Are they happy? Are they sad? Are they majestic? Are they triumphant? But most importantly, think about the important words or phrases that they're doing, because their national anthems tell you what they consider important. So, I've made some notes based on what previous students in previous years have said. I've added some bits in red which you wouldn't be able to get from the national anthem, but you can see there's a lot of similarities between what each of them are thinking and feeling about their country. Both of them were created from conflict. Both of them see themselves as the land of the free. Now that's going to seem weird when we talk about the Soviet Union being free, when we look at individual rights, but they're talking about freedom in the idea of being free from the rich, free from oppression. They're both also fiercely proud and ready to fight or ready to struggle in order to keep their belief system strong. So, on Schoology, there is a Word document which you guys can download and fill in the blanks, or you can make notes as you see fit. But we're going to look at 4 different slides here. Each time we're going to be directly comparing what the East and the communists believe, and then what the West and the capitalists and Democrats mean. It's a weird thing where you've got communism and capitalism, and communism and democracy. Capitalism refers to the economy, so it refers to the money and businesses. Democracy refers to the politics and the government. Communism does both the money and the politics. So the first 3 slides will look at democracy, the 4th slide will look at capitalism. So, starting out with the Soviet Union and the East. Communists believe the rich must be removed from power. At least they just need to have everything taken away from them and made normal like other people. But most communists, particularly from this period, would argue that they just need to be killed, because they have spent an entire lifetime exploiting the working class, exploiting the people. Now you can see the symbol for communism at the bottom of the screen. It is a hammer and a sickle. A hammer to represent the factory workers and a sickle to represent the agricultural or farming workers, a sickle being used to cut down crops. So a communist thinks that the people must rule themselves, but obviously in a country of 180 million people, you need some people to help lead the people, and that people would be the Communist Party. In a communist country, only the Communist Party is allowed. And the leader of the party, who's called the General Secretary, is incredibly powerful, far more powerful than any president that America has ever had. In terms of democracy, it looks very much like Britain does today, because Britain is a democracy. The people vote for who they want as a leader. Sometimes that's directly. In America, you vote for the president. In Britain, very few people actually choose the prime minister, but you'll choose the prime minister indirectly by voting for his party. More than one party can exist. There is in fact a British Communist Party which you're welcome to vote for in the next election, but hopefully this course will show you why that would be a horrible idea. But most importantly, the leader can get voted out of power. So if you don't think the Prime Minister is doing a particularly good job, in 5 years' time, you can vote them out. In the Soviet Union, only one leader is ever removed from power because he was unpopular. And it's not even because he was unpopular with the people, it's because he was unpopular with his party. So, looking at human rights, in other words, what individual people can do. They can easily be summed up by saying the communists have very few rights, the Democrats have most or if not all rights that a normal person can have. So, communists, no right to say what you want, no right to protest. In other words, the communist government can rule at any time that what you say is unacceptable. Critics of the government or critics of Joseph Stalin or the Soviet leader can be sent to work camps for 30 years, or they could just be taken around the back and shot. All newspapers are controlled by the party. And remember, when we said the party, we mean the Communist Party, because there only is one. Secret police spy on the public to make sure that these rules are being followed, and your neighbour or even one of your children might inform on you, might tell the secret police that you've said something very nasty about Joseph Stalin or another member of the Communist Party. And again, you could be taken out of your bed in the middle of the night, never to be seen again. On the other hand, in a democratic country, you've got free speech and the right to protest within sensible limits. So I can say what I like about the Prime Minister or their government. What I can't do is directly threaten them or plot to overthrow them. So they're the sorts of things which are obviously unacceptable. Beyond that, there's very little government interference with newspapers. In other words, there's very little censorship, where they ban certain things from coming out, and very little propaganda, where the government makes sure that this thing is heard above anything else. Also, in terms of justice, people are only to be jailed after a fair trial. So if I'm arrested for a crime, I am entitled a defence lawyer. I'm entitled to have a jury of 12 men and women to decide whether or not I'm guilty. And even if I am guilty, the sentence I get has already been set down by law. So in terms of their culture, it is very much in the same vein as the individual human right. The Communist Party gets to decide films, paintings, TV, radio, everything. Everything has to be complementary of communism. It's not allowed to insult communism. And it's certainly not allowed to say that capitalism or democracy is good. In a Western democracy, it's pretty much the other way around. Artists are free to create whatever they want, as long as it's not too critical of America. Certainly there's some points in the Cold War where criticising America, criticising capitalism or democracy, or praising communism is going to be incredibly unpopular and could get you removed from your job. But on the whole, a truly democratic country allows you to say or create whatever you want. So, final slide on this, we're going to be looking at the economic differences. Remember that when we say economy, we mean anything to do with money or business or industry. In a communist country, in a truly communist country, the government, the party, controls the entire economy. In other words, every single part of money changing hands or things being made is controlled by the government. And remember, they are doing this for the people. Everyone in that country should work together for the good of the people. And if you're doing it for the good of the people, you're not doing it for yourself. Therefore, you shouldn't be paid more than someone else. So a brain surgeon and a bin man get paid the same. Now, they both do incredibly important jobs. I'd never want to live in a world which only had one of those types of people. But a brain surgeon has to do more than a bin man to become a brain surgeon. There's years and years and years of study at university, years of training at school, years of training in hospitals, years and years and years where he's being followed by someone else and making sure he's doing it absolutely correctly, as opposed to a bin man where you literally learn it on the job. So if you want there to be loads and loads of brain surgeons, you want to make sure that they are being rewarded somehow. And that's one of the main reasons why communism failed in the long run. In the short run, after World War II, having the government control everything was fantastic because it meant that they could make sure there's a large supply of jobs, there's a large supply of labour, so things could get rebuilt relatively quickly. But by the 1970s, 1980s and 1990s, the Soviets realised that their economy was not set up to encourage people to try hard. Because if you're going to get paid pretty much the same as anyone else, why bother working harder than anyone else? In comparison, in a capitalist society, rich individuals can own their own businesses. You might remember our work with Henry Ford in 1920s America. You can work out of your garage for a couple of years. You might fail, you might become penniless, but if you succeed, you are entitled to keep millions and millions and millions of dollars. More generally, an average person working for personal profit has an incentive or a reason to work harder than others. So, next 3 slides, we've got a range of different activities. Can you make sure you're doing at least one of them? Pick the one which you think you can answer the best. So we've got a couple of questions here for you to be thinking about. So what might the biggest difference between the USA and the Soviet Union be? And which difference would be the likely to cause the most tension? Now you could argue actually it's not their ideologies or their beliefs, it's actually the differences between how they fared or how they survived World War II. And there's a stretch and challenge I'd like everyone to be thinking about. Based on all of their differences in belief, based on their ideological differences, was a Cold War inevitable? Was it always going to be the case that these two superpowers were harshly competing? Or do you think some friendly, light-hearted competition could have existed instead? Next one to be thinking about is why on earth there would be supporters for each side. Hopefully I haven't converted anyone to communism and you are all strong capitalists and strong Democrats with a strong social justice side in the middle. But think, why would it be that millions of people in the Soviet Union or in wider Eastern Europe genuinely supported a communist society rather than go for a capitalist and democratic one? So you can write a brief speech explaining why one of these sides is right. It'd be about 100 words, maybe a third of a page. Maybe if you swap with someone else and then try and convince the other side or get a third person to judge who's argued the case most strongly. Finally, we've got another suggestion on an activity, creating a title page, simply because, especially if you're going to be learning about this at home, it's really a good idea to make sure that your notes and your files are well organized. So to do that, if you make a title page for the first topic, we've got the dates here, the origins of the Cold War, 1941 to 1958. The other two topics are Cold War crises, 1960 to 1968. I have no idea why they skipped out the last year there. And then the end of the Cold War from 1970 to 1991. So hopefully you found this useful. We'll be making a few more of these and seeing what you guys think. And if they prove popular, we'll try and make one for as many lessons as we can.